My wife cheated on me at our wedding with my father in the men's restroom. I was imprisoned for 15 years because of this, but I escaped, and I, 30M, recently met this absolutely stunning woman, Emily, 28F, at a mutual friend's party. She was everything I ever dreamed of, smart, funny, and drop-dead gorgeous. From the moment I saw her, I knew I had to get to know her better. We hit it off instantly, and I asked her out on a date the very next week. Our first date was magical. We went to a cozy little Italian restaurant downtown, and we spent hours talking and laughing. I brought her a bouquet of her favorite flowers, lilies. She was so touched, and seeing her smile made my heart race. From that moment on, I knew she was the one. We started seeing each other regularly. Every date was better than the last. We'd go for long walks in the park, have picnics by the lake, and spend evenings at my place watching movies and talking about our dreams. I made sure to show her how much I cared, surprise flowers, sweet little notes, and all the attention she deserved. After a few months of dating, I decided to take the plunge. I planned an elaborate proposal at the same Italian restaurant where we had our first date. I had the waitstaff in on it, and they brought out a dessert platter with "Will you marry me" written in chocolate. When she saw it, she gasped, and I got down on one knee. Tears welled up in her eyes as she said yes. It was the happiest moment of my life. Fast forward to a few days ago, our wedding day. It was a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by our closest family and friends. Emily looked breathtaking in her wedding dress, and I couldn't believe how lucky I was. After exchanging our vows and sealing it with a kiss, we were officially married. It was surreal. The reception was a blast. We had a fantastic band, great food, and everyone was having a wonderful time. After our first dance as husband and wife, I hit the dance floor with my buddies. We were all having a great time, and I couldn't stop gushing about how amazing my wife was. "Isn't she the hottest woman ever?" I kept telling my friends, who all nodded in agreement. After a while, I realized I hadn't seen Emily for a bit. I asked around, and one of her friends mentioned she had gone to the restroom. Wanting to check on her, I headed towards the restrooms to make sure she was okay. I walked towards the restrooms, weaving through the crowd of guests who were dancing, chatting, and having a great time. The atmosphere was electric, and the happiness in the air was palpable. As I approached the restrooms, I couldn't help but smile to myself, thinking about how perfect the day had been so far. When I reached the ladies' room, I waited outside for a few minutes, expecting Emily to come out any second. But after 5 minutes, there was still no sign of her. I started to feel a little worried. Maybe she wasn't feeling well, or perhaps something had happened. I decided to ask one of her bridesmaids, Sarah, if she had seen Emily. "Hey, Sarah," I said, catching her attention as she was chatting with a group of friends. "Have you seen Emily? I heard she was in the restroom, but she's been in there for a while." Sarah looked a bit concerned. "I saw her go in there a few minutes ago, but I haven't seen her come out. Do you want me to check on her?" I nodded, grateful for her help. "Yeah, if you don't mind. I'm starting to get a little worried." Sarah headed towards the restroom while I waited anxiously outside. A couple of minutes later, she came back out, looking a bit puzzled. "She's not in there," Sarah said. "I checked all the stalls, and there's no sign of her." A sense of unease settled over me. That's strange. Maybe she stepped outside for some fresh air. I'll check around the building. I thanked Sarah and made my way towards the exit. The evening air was cool and refreshing, and I took a deep breath as I scanned the area for any sign of Emily. I walked around the perimeter of the building, peering into the shadows and calling her name softly, but there was no response. Feeling increasingly concerned, I headed back inside and decided to ask more people if they had seen her. I approached a group of her friends who were standing near the bar. "Hey guys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have any of you seen Emily? I can't seem to find her." They exchanged worried glances and shook their heads. "No, we haven't seen her for a while," one of them said. "She was dancing with us earlier, but then she said she needed to use the restroom, and we haven't seen her since." I thanked them and continued my search, making my way through the reception hall and asking anyone I came across if they had seen my wife. The more people I asked, the more worried I became. No one had seen her, and it felt like she had vanished into thin air. As I made my way back towards the restrooms, I ran into one of my groomsmen, Mike. "Hey, man," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Have you seen Emily? She's been missing for a while now, and no one seems to know where she is." Mike's brow furrowed with concern. No, I haven't seen her. Do you want me to help you look for her? Yeah, that would be great, I said, relieved to have some backup. Let's split up and check the entire building. She has to be somewhere around here. Mike and I began our search, checking every room, hallway, and corner of the venue. We asked every guest we encountered if they had seen Emily, but no one had any information. My worry was growing by the minute, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. After what felt like an eternity of searching, Mike and I reconvened near the entrance. "Any luck?" he asked, his expression mirroring my own concern. I shook my head, feeling a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. "No, nothing. It's like she disappeared." Just then I saw Sarah approaching us, her face pale and her eyes wide with worry. "I just checked with the catering staff," she said, her voice trembling. "They said they saw Emily heading towards the back exit a while ago. I think she might have gone outside." My heart skipped a beat. "Let's go check," I said, my voice urgent. Mike, Sarah, and I hurried towards the back exit, pushing open the door and stepping out into the night. The area behind the venue was dimly lit, and I could barely make out the shapes of parked cars and the outline of a small garden. We called out Emily's name, our voices echoing in the stillness. There was no response. We split up again, searching the parking lot and the garden, but Emily was nowhere to be found. I was starting to panic, my mind racing with all the worst-case scenarios. Where could she be? Was she hurt? Had something happened to her? Just as I was about to call the police, I heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. I turned around to see Emily emerging from the shadows, looking a bit disheveled but otherwise unharmed. "Emily!" I exclaimed, rushing towards her and pulling her into a tight embrace. "Where have you been? I've been worried sick." She looked up at me with a tired smile. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to worry you. I just needed some air and a moment to myself. The reception was getting a bit overwhelming." I sighed with relief, my heart finally starting to slow down. "I'm just glad you're okay. I was really worried when I couldn't find you." Emily hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry I scared you. I should have told someone where I was going." We walked back inside, hand in hand, and I couldn't help but feel grateful that she was safe. The rest of the evening went smoothly, and we spent the night dancing and celebrating with our friends and family. But the memory of those tense moments when I couldn't find her would stay with me for a long time. After searching nearly every corner of the building and not finding Emily, I was on the verge of calling the police. My mind was racing with worry, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. Just as I pulled out my phone to dial 911, a thought struck me I hadn't checked the men's restroom. Given that there were no signs indicating which restroom was for men and which was for women, it was possible she had gone in there by mistake. Desperate and clinging to any hope, I decided to check the men's restroom. I pushed open the door to the restroom and immediately heard the faint sounds of moaning. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept closer to the stalls, the noises growing louder and more distinct. I recognized the sound of Emily's voice, and my stomach twisted into a knot. With trembling hands, I pushed open one of the stall doors. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. There was Emily, straddling my father, lost in the throes of passion. They were so caught up in each other that they didn't notice me right away. For a moment, I was paralyzed with shock, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Then a surge of rage and betrayal surged through me, and I let out a scream. My voice echoed off the tiled walls, finally catching their attention. They both turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. "No, please don't do this," Emily cried, her voice breaking with desperation. But I was beyond reasoning. In a blind fury, I reached for the gun I always carried for self-defense. I pulled it out and pointed it at them, my hands shaking with rage. "How could you?" I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. "How could you do this to me?" They both started to plead with me, begging for me to put the gun down. "Please, son, don't do this," my father said, his voice trembling. But I couldn't hear them over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Without thinking, I pulled the trigger, emptying the entire magazine in their direction. My aim was wild, and none of the bullets hit their mark. In the midst of the chaos, my father reached his climax, an image that would forever be seared into my memory. The gunshots had drawn the attention of my friends, who burst into the restroom just as I fired the last shot. They tackled me to the ground, wrestling the gun out of my hands. "What the hell are you doing?" Mike shouted, pinning me down. Emily, still in shock, scrambled to her feet and quickly called the police. As the reality of what had just happened sank in, the adrenaline began to wear off, and I was left with nothing but a deep, searing pain. The betrayal was too much to bear. The police arrived within minutes, and I was handcuffed and taken into custody. Emily and my father gave their statements, and I was charged with reckless endangerment and attempted murder, though thankfully no one was physically hurt. As I sat in the holding cell waiting for my lawyer, I couldn't stop replaying the events of the night in my head. The image of Emily and my father together, the sound of their pleas, and the sight of my friends tackling me to the ground. It all felt like a horrible nightmare. I couldn't believe what had happened. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Everything had started so perfectly. Emily and I exchanged vows, surrounded by our closest family and friends. The reception was full of joy and celebration, but now it felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the horrific scene I had stumbled upon. As I sat in that cold, sterile cell, the shock slowly began to wear off, replaced by a deep, burning rage. How could they do this to me? My own father and my new wife betraying me in the worst possible way. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing about it made any sense. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Hours passed, and eventually, my lawyer arrived. He was a middle-aged man with a stern face and a calm demeanor. He had been my family's lawyer for years, and I trusted him. "David," he said, sitting across from me, "I need you to tell me everything that happened tonight, from the beginning." I took a deep breath and recounted the events of the evening, my voice shaking with emotion. I told him about the wedding, the reception, and the moment I realized Emily was missing. I described how I searched the entire building, finally deciding to check the men's restroom and the horrifying sight that greeted me. After recounting every painful detail to my lawyer, we were summoned to the courtroom. The atmosphere was tense, and I could feel the weight of the upcoming trial pressing down on me. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, tried to reassure me as we walked in. "Stay calm, David. We'll get through this." The trial began, and my heart pounded in my chest. Emily sat across from me, looking composed and confident. My father was beside her, his face a mask of worry. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, took his seat, and the proceedings began. Mr. Thompson presented our case, arguing that I had acted in a state of extreme emotional distress. He explained the shock and betrayal I felt upon discovering my wife and father in such a compromising position. The jury listened intently, and for a moment I felt a glimmer of hope. Then it was the prosecution's turn. They painted me as a violent and unstable individual who posed a danger to society. They emphasized my use of a firearm and my reckless behavior. Emily testified against me, her voice steady and convincing. She portrayed herself as the victim, claiming that she had been afraid for her life. As the trial continued, something began to feel off. The judge seemed unusually dismissive of our arguments and overly accommodating to the prosecution. My lawyer noticed it too, but there was little we could do. The entire trial felt rushed, as if a decision had already been made. After only 20 minutes of deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. "David Thompson, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison for reckless endangerment and assault with a deadly weapon." I was stunned. How could this be happening? The evidence was clear, yet it felt like a farce. My lawyer tried to protest, but the judge quickly dismissed him. It wasn't until later that I learned the truth. Emily had bribed the judge to ensure my conviction. The betrayal cut even deeper, and I was left feeling completely hopeless. A few days after my conviction, I was transferred to a maximum security prison. The environment was harsh and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the life I once knew. My cellmates were hardened criminals, many of them serving life sentences for heinous crimes. I was placed in a cell with two men, Jake and Mark. They were both convicted serial killers, and their reputations preceded them. At first, I was terrified, but as time went on, I began to realize that they were more than just their crimes. They were human beings who had been through hell and back. Jake was the first to reach out to me. "Hey, new guy. What's your story?" he asked one night as we sat in our cell. I hesitated at first, but decided to open up. I told them everything: the wedding, the betrayal, and the rushed trial. They listened intently, nodding in understanding. When I finished, Jake sighed. Man, that's tough. Sounds like you got seriously screwed over. Mark chimed in. You're not the only one here who got a raw deal. Most of us did. The system's corrupt, and people like us pay the price. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Mark took me under their wing. They taught me the rules of survival in prison: who to trust, who to avoid, and how to handle myself in dangerous situations. They showed me how to navigate the complex social hierarchy and avoid unnecessary conflicts. Despite the bleak circumstances, we found ways to make the best of our time. We shared stories, played cards, and even found humor in the darkest of situations. In a strange way, I found a sense of camaraderie with them, a bond forged in the crucible of our shared suffering. One day, during our daily exercise in the yard, Jake approached me with a serious look on his face. David, we've been talking. We're thinking about escaping. The idea seemed ludicrous at first, but as Jake and Mark laid out their plan, I began to see the glimmer of possibility. They had been working on the details for months, and they believed they had found a way to break out during our weekly recreation time. We're tired of rotting away in here, Jake said, and it sounds like you have some unfinished business on the outside. He was right. The thought of Emily and my father living their lives unpunished for their betrayal gnawed at me every day. I agreed to join their plan, and we spent the next few weeks meticulously preparing for our escape. We planned to make our move during a special extended exercise period that was granted to us every month. The day of our escape finally arrived. My heart pounded in my chest as we put our plan into motion. Jake, Mark, and I moved swiftly and silently, navigating the prison's corridors with practiced precision. The guards were distracted, just as we had anticipated, and we slipped through the gaps in their surveillance with ease. The moment we breached the perimeter fence and felt the cool night air on our faces, a sense of exhilaration washed over us. We were free. We didn't waste any time. We headed straight for the border, crossing it under the cover of darkness. Once we were safely across, we began the process of creating new identities. With the help of some contacts Jake and Mark had on the outside, we obtained fake passports and set up new lives for ourselves. But we weren't content to simply disappear. I had unfinished business with Emily, and my friends were more than willing to help me see it through. We made our way back to the city where it all began and rented a small house near Emily's residence. From there, we began to observe her, learning her routines and habits. We watched as she went about her daily life, seemingly carefree and unburdened by the destruction she had caused. It made my blood boil to see her living so freely while I had suffered so much. Jake, Mark, and I meticulously planned our next move, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. After weeks of observation, we finally saw our opportunity. Emily had a routine. She would leave her house every morning at 7:30 to go for a run in the nearby park. We decided that this was the perfect time to set our plan into motion. We framed her for a series of crimes that would ensure her downfall. It wasn't easy, but with the skills and knowledge we had acquired, we were able to forge documents, plant evidence, and manipulate the situation to our advantage. We made sure that every piece of evidence pointed to Emily, leaving no room for doubt. The police investigation was swift, and before long, Emily was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming, and despite her protests of innocence, she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. As the gavel fell, sealing her fate, a sense of vindication washed over me. Justice had been served. Emily would spend the rest of her life behind bars, just as I had once feared I would. With our mission accomplished, Jake and Mark decided it was time to part ways. They had their own lives to live, and they deserved a chance at happiness after everything we had been through. We said our goodbyes, promising to stay in touch, and they went their separate ways. As for me, I found solace in a new beginning. I met a wonderful woman named Laura, who brought light and joy back into my life. We started dating, and it wasn't long before we fell deeply in love. She was everything I had ever wanted: kind, compassionate, and supportive. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by our closest friends. It was a stark contrast to my first wedding, but it was perfect in every way. Laura and I built a beautiful life together, and we were blessed with 3 wonderful children. Watching my children grow and thrive brought me a sense of fulfillment and happiness that I had never known before. We live a happy life, filled with love and laughter. The pain and betrayal of the past slowly faded away, replaced by the warmth and comfort of my new family. I often thought about Jake and Mark, hoping that they had found their own peace and happiness. They had been my lifeline during the darkest days of my life, and I would be forever grateful for their friendship and support. In the end, I realized that life is full of unexpected twists and turns. But no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always hope for a brighter future. I had found mine, and I cherished every moment of it.